Thank you, Megan, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Patrick Roscoe, or Patrick D. Roscoe. I'm trying to get that going. I like my little initial. I'm a junior at Fort Hays State University. I'm an organization and leadership major, and I'm also the president of the Black Student Union. And basically what I do around campus is outside of class, I do a lot of different student advocacy projects around campus. I've recently worked with Megan during Black History Month with a photo series. I've worked with Vivian Agnew for Civic Engagement Week. And this is actually Civic Engagement Week, if you didn't know. So I think this presentation will hold some importance for this week. It's not a hard concept to grasp, but you will understand and it'll be a good presentation. All right, so what we'll talk about today is what civil disobedience is, what it derives from, examples of civil disobedience in the US and other countries, society's view on civil disobedience, and that'll actually be where I talk to you guys because we all are a part of society, and get your opinion on it. And we'll kind of discuss what is worldwide, what it looks like, and then we'll talk about civil disobedience and civic engagement. So this is a general definition that I found online. Civil disobedience is the active, professed refusal to obey certain laws, demands, and commands of a government or of an occupying active power based off of the belief or interpretation of one's civil and human rights. And those civil and human rights are those rights that we get from birth, inalienable rights that we all have the right to. We talk about our First Amendment a lot recently over the past 2 years with the elections and different events that have transpired across the country. And in other countries, we've talked about our freedom of speech, and we've talked about our right to bear arms and different things like that. But those amendments have really been targeted over the past 2 years. So those inalienable rights that are being imposed on by a greater organization. So that's what civil disobedience is. Okay, so we'll talk about the origin or the early practitioners, because there's kind of a discussion of who came up with the idea of civil disobedience and what it is and where it started and where was it first used. And so we have Henry David Thoreau. He's a poet, an author, an abolitionist, an activist, a naturalist. He's a good guy all around. So he wrote the civil disobedience essay, which is a very lengthy document. Basically, it came out of the retaliation of him not wanting to pay federal poll taxes for I believe, the Mexican War and slavery. So he was not willing to pay taxes in efforts to support those causes, and he kind of coined that phrase, civil disobedience. But long before Henry David Thoreau, we're going to skip down to Socrates. He was a Greek philosopher, and he actually mentioned civil disobedience. But he was kind of on the fence about it. He didn't necessarily agree with it. He didn't necessarily think that we should go out and fight against the government or the higher powers. And then we have one of our more prominent, famous activists, Gandhi. We're all familiar with Gandhi, correct? Either we've seen a picture of him or watched an infomercial or something like that on Gandhi. And he is known for his work with the Indian independence movement in India when it came to the British imposing laws and things like that and having governing control over India. And then we'll talk about some common examples of civil disobedience. So we've all heard of protests heavily. Can anyone give me an example of these events that we've seen protests go on? Whitney?
Yes, the 5 for 15.
Okay, and could you explain what that is?
Yes, so there's been several protests in, I don't know what exact cities, but to raise minimum wage up to $15 an hour for many different reasons. So it's just a movement that many are protesting.
Yeah, it's been one of those things in the media lately where people are saying, I'm a nurse, or I do something that is very vital to our society. I provide a service that we cannot live without, basically. But these individuals who are flipping burgers or frying our French fries, they should not be allowed to gain more minimum wage than I do. And there's a lot of different factors into that. And I was actually having this discussion the other night with a friend that you can't necessarily be on one side of things, where civil disobedience comes from, and the activism and the protests and things like that. Sit-ins, where was that widely used in American history? I'm sorry?
In the 60s.
Yeah, and what event? Large scale, but the huge event, the civil rights movement in the 60s. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I actually have a story. My church at home, we have one of our ministers. He's a activist in the community, and there's a store in Houston called Weingarten's, and it was like a deli, grocery store type place. You can go in, sit at the counter, order a sandwich. And he actually took part in one of the first sit-ins in Houston, Texas, which is really profound. And there are two very different polar opposites, because in Houston it was not as bad as like Alabama. It wasn't near as bad. There were individuals, if you've seen the movie Selma or The Butler, or you've just paid attention in history class, there have been individuals who participated in these sit-ins and these protests, and they've been beat, they've been kicked, they've been spit on, they've had food thrown in their face, they've been killed, they've been hanged. So there's a lot of different perspectives from these. Hunger strikes. Have you guys heard of I think it's Zimbardo experience, or the experiment where a philosophy professor at Stanford University, he takes the basement of their building and turns it into a prison. And he gets these students to sign up for this experiment, and they really get engaged mentally with the experience. He has students who pose as guards, and he has students who pose as prisoners, and they clean out these closets, and they put people in there, and they strip search them, and they do everything that would happen in the prison system when you're booked into a facility in the United States. And hunger strikes were one of their forms of protest and civil disobedience when they weren't getting what they wanted. So, and I'm sure it's been used other places as well, but that's one prime example here in the United States, been used in the educational setting as well. And blockades. We know what blockades are, right? Yeah, blockades. No, blockades are just simply block. If you just take that word, different instances where people have blocked roads even, or blocked a flow of transportation, or a flow of goods being transported from different countries or different areas, and in a way of civil disobedience, saying that no, you won't get what you want until we get what we want, and since we control these channels, we're going to provide a blockade. All right, so we've talked about what civil disobedience is and examples of what those are, and then now we have civil disobedience nationally and internationally. And nationally, you'll see some things that you're familiar with. Most of you should be familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and John Lewis and the Civil Rights Movement. And you kind of touched on that in the 60s. Who doesn't know what the Civil Rights Movement is? Good, that's a good thing. I'm proud of you. So the Civil Rights Movement was one of those events in American history where we saw the largest participation of civil disobedience, and on many different levels and many different scales. The anti-Vietnam War movement, I'm not too familiar with it because I wasn't brought up in the era of the Vietnam War. I don't think most of you were. But the anti-Vietnam War movement was basically a movement where, from what I've researched, the younger generation during the time they broke into offices and stole like draft records and things like that, because they used to draft young men into the military. And they stole the cards and the papers and the lists and everything. And there was a time where they buried their draft cards in the ground and they couldn't find them, to kind of basically provide a disruption from getting drafted into the military. So that's one way that we've seen it. Pro-life organizations. We know what pro-life is. Individuals or an organization that is anti-abortion. And those organizations really took fire in like the 70s. And now we see it kind of almost everywhere. If we're on the interstate, we see billboards talking about anti-abortion, and we have a Students for Life, I believe, is an organization on campus that promotes pro-life, and different events, and the posters that are on the Union patio once a year that we may find disturbing at times, but it's an act of civil disobedience and standing against what the government says is right, but we feel it's inflicting on our moral or human or civil rights. I have a couple states listed here: Florida, Missouri, Maryland, and New York. Can anyone tell me what those states represent, or what event is common within those states? I'm sorry? Police brutality. In Florida, there was Trayvon Martin. In Missouri, there was, Ferguson, Missouri. And then there was Baltimore, Maryland. Michael Brown. Michael Brown. In Baltimore, Maryland, we have Freddie Gray. And then in New York, we have, forgot his name, Eric Garner, yes. And these were states where individuals were a victim of police brutality. And in result of that, there were national outcries from almost every state in the United States. There were protests, there were sit-ins, there were die-ins at universities, public places, in the streets. There were riots, there were protests, and there is a good civil disobedience and a bad civil disobedience, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's needed, in my opinion. All right, internationally, Gandhi, the Indian independence movement, I kind of talked about that, and the independence from Great Britain. Nelson Mandela, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and Steve Biko, and anti-apartheid or segregation. Are you guys familiar with apartheid? Yes? So that happened, and I don't know how to pronounce this exactly, but it basically translates to "this is our land." This was in Israel, and they basically took the practices that happened during the civil rights movement to express themselves and get the rights and the freedom that they felt that they were privileged to or that they were due, just simply as citizens. All right, so this is my favorite quote now. I did this a couple weeks back with Megan during Black History Month. And it says, if we accept and act against the face of discrimination, we accept the responsibility ourselves and allow those responsible to salve their conscience by believing that they have our acceptance and concurrence. We should therefore protest openly everything that smacks of discrimination or slander. And that was by Mary McCarthy, and she was an educator, African-American educator. And what that means to me is basically, we can't allow our inalienable rights to be imposed on. We have to stand up, we have to say something, we have to take part in civil disobedience. And I'm not talking about going out to CVS. I'm not talking about going and shooting and killing somebody, but getting out there and using your voice and advocating for yourself and others who are unrepresented or underrepresented or who are being imposed on by a law or policy or rule or something like that that is enabling them from living the life that they deserve to live. And I think we all have a duty to do that as citizens. And in the time that we're in right now, with all the controversial topics and things like that that are coming up with the election, I keep thinking back to the election. This isn't about the election, but I keep thinking about it because there are a lot of things that are transpiring that are like of evil, and it's imposing on our ability to live in our rights as humans, as citizens, and as humans. And we have to act. We have to retaliate. And I think the answer to that, and the answer has always been civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is something that has been around for years and years and years and years. And it's kind of like when you go to class and you learn something and you've known it, and then you put a frame or a theory to it, and then you give it a name. So civil disobedience is something that we've done and we've acted on for many years. The Boston Tea Party, different revolutions throughout history. Civil disobedience has been the root of that. So that's what I want to talk about. Do you guys have any questions or anything like that?
So Patrick, when you were researching civil disobedience, did you come across anything that you found particularly interesting? Or different types of protests that you found interesting?
Well, yeah, there were people who would like set themselves on fire in the middle of the street in face of like civil disobedience. Like that's what their civil disobedience was. And I think it's all about what your effort is and how into it you are, because that can be who's willing to set themselves on fire in face of no one. Yeah. So I think it's all about what your aim is and how into it you are. That's commitment. I think you would all agree that setting yourself on fire is commitment. Anyone else have a question? Yes, we can.
Have you ever participated in civil disobedience yourself?
I can't say that I have in a drastic way, but I do advocate for students and others on campus and others around me. I have not had an opportunity to participate in protest or anything like that, simply because before when there was an opportunity. I think we did a protest here about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. Yeah, and Trey Giles kind of headed that, and Amber, you helped as well with that. And I was kind of afraid of that because you kind of have to know what you're getting yourself into, and especially with seeing what's happening across the country when people are protesting and rioting. As an African-American male, that can be scary because you don't want to be another victim or a part of that vicious cycle that we have in this country. And I'm not meaning to offend anyone, but that's something that you really think about when you're in my position, or when you're with any organization or a group of people that are that don't have the public opinion or the brightest opinion. Yes.
In your opinion, like, what are small acts of civil disobedience? That, like, if someone wants to start out, like, on a small scale, like, what should they do to, like, on a small scale to advocate for what they believe?
I think there are, here at Fort Hays, there are opportunities to get engaged with civil disobedience. They may not be labeled as that, but being a part of the Student Government Association is a great way to get involved with something that will slowly progress you to that, to being civically disobedient. Being a part of the American Democracy Project, helping out with different issues. Tigers in Service, different service opportunities. And I think service opportunities are where they kind of start, where civil disobedience starts, because you have to be, you get engaged at some point and you build a love or a passion for what you're fighting for, what you're fighting against. So those are very small ways that it can gradually build up where you can be engaged. Yes?
Patrick, we have, and I can't remember the organization, but they came to Kansas and they did quite a bit of research, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and they deemed us as being Kansas nice. So the Midwest, specifically Kansas, what they were looking at is Kansas, we're just nice to each other. We're not maybe as willing to challenge one another and confront each other. I'm curious what you think about that, one, and then two, how might that get in the way of this idea of civil disobedience? If we are maybe a little bit more concerned about those relationships between our peers and our colleagues than maybe someone on the East or the West Coast. I'm sounding stereotypical and I don't mean to, but that's something that those people found when they came and did that research in Kansas.
Right. I will say from what I've heard from students, other students of color, students who identify in a minority group, people in Kansas are only nice to you if you're from Kansas. And that may offend some people because some of you are like, you've been a Kansan, like all of your family, everyone's from Kansas. But you're nice to people who look like you, and you're nice to people who are, and I don't mean just racially, you're nice to people who look like you, and you're nice to people who you can relate to and that you can favor with and reason with. And I think that's a big part of that. So I don't know where they were looking, and there's not much of a, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't know exactly where they were researching and what cities and what towns and who they were speaking to, but there is definitely an opposite to that opinion. And when you talk about worrying about those relationships and things like that, that can be hard because I've noticed in Hays, the politics in this town, it's a good old boy, good old girl system. And you know, you get in and you want to stick in, and you don't want to ruin that at all. So it can be very difficult to speak up and protest different topics and different subjects that you don't necessarily agree with, but due to the way that things are played out here, and not only here but in other areas, you tend to just go along with things. So I don't know, be ready to be blacklisted, blackballed. So yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
I guess I would agree in terms of, I think it's our right and also our responsibility for civil disobedience. The biggest problem that I sometimes see is it seems like when people are protesting or groups are protesting, they get caught up in all the frenzy, and then it just turns or escalates into something that is maybe sometimes not what they intended it for it to be. And it goes beyond that level, and that's kind of a tough line to how do you voice your opinion and not get caught up or have others get caught up with you into where it's something that wasn't really intended for. And I see that's one of the biggest issues with a lot of the protests that go on.
Right. I think civil disobedience is definitely something that has to be strategic. It has to be something that is structured in a way, because when you don't have a well thought out process, or at least some type of outline, because everything doesn't go by the book, by each bullet point that you list out. But you have to have some type of overview, some kind of outline of what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, and how you're going to do that, and what you're not going to do, and what you are going to do, and how that's perceived, because that's a lot of it. Because you have the media and other sources, that perception is very important. And sometimes you may get to the point where you say, I don't care what they think, I don't care what they do. This is my right, and this is what I'm going to do, and if they don't like it, oh well. But that has consequences as well. But I think it's not very structured or strategically planned out, which is why it goes from, okay, we're protesting for this, and then it turns into a riot 2 days later, then an entire city going to ruin a week or so later. So I think it has to be very strategic with that.
And I think the media has caused a lot of this in everything that we do. They get caught up in that, and the media makes note of it, and people see that or hear that, and they kind of join in, and it just escalates.
Yeah, my freshman year of high school, I took a class, and one of the guys, he worked at one of the news stations in Houston, KHOU, and he said, we pray for disasters. Because that's how they get their ratings, that's how they make their money, that's how they get to go out there in the field. They pray for disasters, they pray for different things to happen that would allow them to boost in some way. So, I mean, that's their goal, but they are getting out of hand, I guess. So, yeah. That's a good question. Thank you. Yes?
Do you think the media has had a more of a positive or more of a negative effect on civil disobedience like today?
Negative, because what we all turn to the news channel to, or we go to the New York Times or whatever we're going to, we go to that source to get reliable sources about what's going on, and we want to know, what's right, what's wrong, what's the view. We want to know the overview of an issue or a topic that's in the, in society or in the media today. So I think that a lot of the times we have a lot of corruptness in media, and they show those things that aren't necessarily in good light. During the protests for Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, there were good protests and there were bad protests. You didn't see any of those peaceful protests. You didn't see any of those town hall meetings. You didn't see any of that in the media. Or at least I didn't. I had to, look at people's Facebook page and photos that they were sharing and things like that. But I couldn't turn to Fox or CNN or your local station and see that in the media. So they definitely, like I said, they grab for the things that are going to boost them and that is going to give them the most ratings. Because when you're watching the news and they say, oh, well, someone found their puppy today, you're like, oh, okay. But then they're like, fire on 8th Street, 8 houses burned down. Then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to watch this. And you're like tuned back in 2 hours later to check the updates and things like that. So, I mean, it's definitely what grabs your attention. So it falls back on society as well. And I think I just kind of segue to that. It falls back on what we're interested in. And I think we're slowly getting back to wanting to be very interested in the facts and the truth. And we're realizing that what's being disseminated to us, what we're being fed is not the truth. And it's not factual. So, good question. Yes?
Do you think there is a need for civil disobedience before hate speech? Like, do you think there is a good and greater need for us to act out in civil disobedient ways?
As of right now, no. And when topics arise and things come up, then we put into action what we're going to do. As of right now, no. But I think in the past, maybe there have been some instances where we should have come together and we should have acted in civil disobedience against something that was imposing on us as students and as citizens. So yeah, there are definitely opportunities, I think, that we need to do more standing up. Because at our institution, and Ms. Amber, you tell us this all the time with BSU, they don't want to hear from the faculty and the staff. You guys can go and complain and say what's wrong, and you can do that all day. And you guys are laughing because you know it's true. You can do that all day long, and you can fight for budgeting and things like that, but until the students actually show a need for that change, then nothing's going to get done. And I think a lot of you in here, you guys are involved and you're in organizations and stuff like that. There's one big topic, I'm not going to mention it, there's one main thing that's happening on our campus, and with transitions, and a lot of us students are finding out about it, and it's getting to us. So I foresee some uproar from the students in the future about different changes and things like that that are happening on campus that maybe faculty and staff have seen. You know, they saw it 2 years ago, but now, or 5 years ago, I don't know, that was bad, but now the students are catching on to it, and it's gonna be an issue in the future. So maybe we'll see some civil disobedience acted out then. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
So you keep mentioning like good protesting, bad protesting, or bad civil disobedience. Chernobyl is a trans activist who recently stated at a conference that I got to attend, like there's a saying of like you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar, flies with honey than vinegar, but like I'm not out here catching bees, I'm fighting for my life. And so that's not always gonna look nice or be respectable in somebody else's eyes. And sometimes we quote people or specific people to make people, or try to get people to see a certain point of view. But even Dr. Martin Luther King said, rioting is a language of voices unheard. And so I'm assuming, from my understanding of what you've been saying, you're saying that rioting might be bad civil disobedience, but so why would you consider that bad civil disobedience?
Personally, because I would not participate in rioting, simply because I haven't seen a good outcome from rioting. And I mean, rioting, it's bad. I mean, it's not bad, not the cause, but it ends badly. Not necessarily for the individuals, but in some cases, yes, but the environment, the surrounding, the cause that you're fighting for. So I haven't seen any successful riots. I mean, that's why. And I don't know if there is a successful riot, but I'm not too engaged in that. But I'm all about, wow, that may sound bad, but I'm all about advocating and talking about it and seeing where we can get to a point where action can be taken rather than just going out and doing whatever without thinking about it.
So can I provide you a perspective?
Yes.
So if I choose writing as a way because maybe I'm tired of talking about it because nothing's coming from these conversations that we're having, and so until something happens, and if it takes something drastic to happen, this is also not me not advocating for writing, but understanding that people don't just wake up and like, I'm gonna burn down my city today. No one does that. So it starts from something and a lack of something, and kind of thinking about it from that perspective of like, maybe talking wasn't enough, or talking isn't getting us anywhere. So by taking some sort of action that's not necessarily deemed respectable by somebody else to get some sort of result.
Right. And I think what you just said was played out in those different states that I listed, because you would hear from personal testimonials that those individuals were tired of talking. They were tired of trying to get their voices heard, and they felt like that's the only way that they could get attention. And they didn't care that they were tearing up the environment. They didn't care about it. And I say tearing up the environment, that's not a good or bad thing. I mean, they just didn't care. When you've told a group of individuals that they won't amount to anything, they won't have an opportunity to move forward in life, they won't have the same opportunities as someone else in society, what do they have to live for at that point? They don't care about their community. They don't care about that anymore. And like she said, they're tired of talking about it. So I think maybe it's who they were talking to. A lot of times conversations circulate, and they don't necessarily go to the right individuals. And not that, I mean, there are instances where people have gone to their community representatives and things like that, and things still haven't been done. So I don't know. This is a tough one. I just personally don't want to riot.
And an example of something positive coming out of rioting is the Pride parades started as a riot. They're not riots right now, but they've progressed into being peaceful parades and protests that you see all over the country. But Pride started as a riot.
And how long did it take that to happen?
Pride, oh God, Stonewall was 70 something.
Yeah, I think it was in the 70s.
I don't want to lie, and I don't have my phone to look it up. Somebody have it. But whenever Stonewall started after that, and then like I think the year later is like when Pride parades actually started happening.
So maybe we need to look at different practices in our country and maybe model after that. And if it was just strictly riots, then keep rioting until we get a day of peace parade or something like that. I don't know. All right, is that all? Any other questions? Yes.
Well, one thing I look here at the audience, few of us have experienced some of these things, like you're talking about peace, okay? If you rolled back to, let's say, 1968, where we had Martin Luther King marching for civil rights, we also had, let's say, an effort in the peace process to try delegitimizing the Vietnam War and the draft and a whole host of different things. And as such, in some of our major cities, there was quite a bit of damage done. I know that in the small university town that would be similar to Fort Hays, where I grew up west of Chicago, we had people that participated in these marches, but their job was to be on the sidelines and keep people from creating damage, you know, to make a point without having a full-blown riot. So the big question is, you know, we all look about civil disobedience. Where's the threshold where you're willing to get in, put your skin in the game? Something really irks you about what's being done, and it's not right by your, let's say, view of the world. Like, let's just come up to date right now. Look, we've taken away the 10 Commandments, okay? It can't be shown in public. Disgrace, you know, something that we shouldn't have. It would be too much for people to be exposed to. It might even change their life a little bit. But you look now, we have, let's say, rewriting history. They're rewriting the Bible while they're trying to take it out of public libraries at this point in time. We're kind of like the frog that's sitting in a pan of water, you know, and somebody starts to turn up the heat, but it's just a little at a time. At which point do you think that civil disobedience is going to stop the erosion of what's going to be the downfall of your civilization? I mean, it all starts at some point. And we have to protect our rights. Right now, as I see it, and I'm not sitting here to be a rabble-rouser or anything, but let's look at it. You know, you look at CNN, Fox News, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're complying with the government in a lot of ways, but they get their little side sound bites in. Oh yeah, well, the Supreme Court's making a decision, you know, but we don't think that they should be making law. They should be interpreting it, you know. And as such, they're no longer referring to the Constitution that made this nation so great. Now, I'm not here to be an orator and take your place,
No, you're fine.
but it's something that we all have to think about. Where's the line? Where do you draw it? And how can you be effective in making change without, you know, destroying your civilization in the same manner, you know? I mean, I remember one march going back to '68. I never saw it, but it happened in another section of parade that we were escorting, in essence, trying to keep damage down to a minimum. People breaking windows and going in and looting stores. It's just a common thing. That's how you do your shopping. It's a little cheaper on your pocketbook, as you know. So is that, I'll turn the entertainment back over to you, but think about it. He's got a real good subject here. Disobedience can be for a lot of different things, but you want to make it count, then you want change.
I agree.
I have one last question for you.
Sorry.
I have one last question. So do you feel like we should wait and react to things that are happening, or be proactively protecting things? So for example, when your name is Megan, asked the question if there is anything that U.S. students should be protesting on Fort Hays campus. Right now there is a bill in the legislature of this awesome state to allow, it's very transphobic to be quite honest, it's to allow people who perceive someone as trans in a gender specific bathroom to sue the institution for a minimum of $2,500 each and every time it happens. should we wait till this bill becomes law to say be civilly disobedient and protest, or should we do something now, in your opinion?
Okay. So did you guys hear what she said? You know what she's talking about exactly?
Exactly what I was referring to.
Okay.
Thanks. We should speak now, we should talk now, we should protest now, but I think a protest doesn't necessarily mean out walking the streets. I mean, it's going to the Capitol and lobbying and things like that. So, I mean, we should definitely take those opportunities, and there are those outlets to do that, and you don't even need an outlet from 4 days to do that. You can go do that yourself. So, yes, we should be talking about that now, rather than later, because it'll be a little bit more difficult to get that, you know, turned over, rather than not have it go through at all. So, yes, I agree with you. That's something that I feel strongly about. Yes. All right.
Is that it?
Is that it? I think so. Thank you guys so much.